I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
On today's episode, I sit down with some Hornady employees that had an early hand in the development and the use of the 300 PRC. We'll talk about how it was designed and why it was designed. We'll talk about some of its military application. We'll talk about its hunting application. And then we'll just talk about the fun factor of shooting a big 30 cal Magnum at extreme ranges. Now, we know there's a lot of great 30 caliber cartridges that have been on the market for a long time, but we really think that the 300 PRC is the ultimate tool for long-range performance. Enjoy the show. All right, guys, thanks for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it. So to set the scene for our listeners who are listening but not watching, I've got a kind of a motley crew of guys sitting around the table with me, purveyors of most things awesome. And to my left, we've got our senior ballistician, Jayden Quinlan. Across the table, Assistant Director of Engineering, Joe Thielen, and then Marketing Director, Neil Davies. Guys, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely. So I say purveyors of all things awesome because you guys tend to have a hand in all of the air quote skunk works things that go on here at Hornady, or at least in my time since 2013. If there's been an undercover project going on, Joe was usually at the helm, Jayden doing the ballistics, and Neil always had a gun or was doing something with it. Is that a fair assessment?
That's quite accurate.
So what you're saying is we've always been afraid that we might lose our job at some point, probably, because those black ops sometimes don't go unnoticed.
Right.
Yeah.
So Hornady does not have an official black ops program per se, skunk works, if you will. Although it does seem that our upper echelons of management knowingly turned a blind eye to some of the stuff that we may or may not be playing around with. And agreeable on that one?
As long as they don't listen to this podcast, I'll say they don't know the half of it.
Okay.
But to be fair though, that's what everybody should be doing in a company like this. I mean, that's how those ideas get fleshed out.
Mm-hmm.
You find something and you like it and you play around with it, and we've got a brilliant group of people that know a lot of stuff about ballistics, cartridge case development, and bullet development, and then at some point that does see the light of day and it gets revealed.
Right, and I think that a good kind of synopsis I've heard of a business is in business to make money, yes, but they're in business to advance their industry and make their product make a better environment for their end user. And I think because our company lets us grab the reins and take the horse for a gallop every now and then, and we can work on those projects, and there's not a whole bunch of oversight with a thumb in your back. You can really get some cool stuff, especially when you're designing something that you want to use. Because as a user, generally that means our customers are going to want that product as well. So I say all that to talk about the 300 PRC. Now, not everybody in the world is going to join the military and have the opportunity to call in an airstrike, but everybody could have the opportunity to shoot a 300 PRC at a piece of steel a long ways away, which is almost like calling in an airstrike. I mean, this thing, tons of energy, huge bullets, hits like a friggin' hammer. Really a fun cartridge to shoot at distances that I would have never thought I would have been able to hit a piece of steel at. I mean, it's just remarkable. And then it's got tons of hunting application, just a super balanced, accurate, big 30 cal Magnum. And it's been a home run for us. And we introduced this cartridge to Sammy in 2018. We launched it as a new product in 2019. But with you guys around the table, this goes way before 2018, 2019 timeframe. So let's rewind the clocks. Everybody jump in the DeLorean. We're going back. Let's talk about where this thing started. And Joe, I know you had a really strong hand in this. Neil, likewise, like I mentioned earlier, I think you were one of the first guns on the hunting side of stuff. So rewind, Joe, how far back do we have to go to get to what was going on that precipitated the 300 PRC?
Yeah, so I started at the company in 2005. And at that time, I was actively shooting long-range 1,000-yard bench rest matches for group and score. So you need and obviously we live in the Midwest and the wind blows. So I learned pretty quickly that 30 cal was applicable in those conditions at those extreme long ranges. So at the time I was shooting a 30 by 68 cartridge because that was a big Magnum case, non-belted, headspace off the shoulder, et cetera, et cetera. I got the chamber print reamer stuff from a friend of mine that was shooting at the time. Worked very well.
That was a Wildcat, right?
It was a Wildcat.
Based off the 8 by 68.
But if anybody's ever tried to find 8 by 68 brass, it's like gold. You can't find it. Well, like everything is now. But anyway, so that was in 2005, 2006, part of 2007. Well, in 2007, we launched.
Need to interject. It's not that you weren't doing well, though, because in 2007, weren't you the IBS Shooter of the Year?
I don't remember. There was
One of those years.
Yeah,
we
let's
did,
just say yes.
Yeah, okay.
we did
Yeah.
good. But anyway, in 2007, and I was working with, because I was new at the time, and I was working with Mitch, and we were in the case plant, and we were working on that 375 Ruger cartridge, the case and stuff. So I'm like, well, that will be a perfect candidate. Thank goodness I don't got to go scour the earth for this other brass. So we introduced the 375. Well, right away, while you're talking skunk works earlier, working the case plant, one of the perks is you just build some extra dies that go in the machine, and pretty soon you have 30 cal cases. So that was the inception of 300 PRC right there. Built some dies, had 375 draws, necked them down, hand annealed them, run them through, drew up a chamber reamer print, this and that, put it in a target rifle, and started there. And then after I shot it in a target rifle, I'm like, this thing's great. You can just stuff it full of powder, put a 210 grain, 8 grain, 20 grain class bullet on it, and it just shoots wonderful. So then soon after that, like, well, this would be great for hunting elk, out west, big animal stuff, elk, moose, all those. So I'm like, I should probably just build a hunting rifle. So build a hunting rifle, and then Neil Davies is like, ooh, I got to have one of those.
Yeah.
So then he builds a hunting rifle. That was in 2000.
Yeah, you had to remind me. What did we say? 2011?
Well, that's when we started. So that's when it went. 2011 was military stuff. Your rifle was like about that frame, 12, whatever we were hunting in Wyoming. So
14.
But
Right.
but mind you, at that time, that cartridge doesn't exist as far as in our company.
Yeah,
Right.
so
It was-
anybody who was loading it had brass with no head stamp, so it's
Yeah.
kind of
I should
cool
have
and
brought
mysterious.
some up here.
Yeah.
I still have some of that
Yeah.
original brass.
So 2007, the 300 PRC starts life as basically a really large-scale Wildcat. With our manufacturing capability and you working in the case plant, you're going to Wildcat something, and it started off in large scale because we can make cases pretty quick. You weren't hand form and stuff.
But that's what it is.
Yeah.
I needed a platform to launch heavy bullets at targets that had to shoot well. I couldn't find brass. I didn't want to use people are using Weatherby's straighten the shoulder out, Win Mags, and all this other. I don't want to deal with the belt and all that other. I'm like, man, I don't want to deal with all that stuff. I saw the problems they had. So I'm like, I just want this.
Yeah, and so everybody else that was shooting bench rest around here adopted that as well. And so a lot of the guys, and we still have a pretty active bench rest shooting team that works here. A lot of guys working bullets and in production and stuff, which is fantastic because, again, they too are interested in making great things for their own use. But yeah, so we weren't shooting PRS much in those days or any of those things.
No,
So most
wasn't a thing in those days.
Well, it wasn't as popular as it is now for sure,
Yeah.
and nor would this cartridge have been applicable for that. But we were shooting NRA or CMP type competition, going to Camp Perry, things like that. And then there was a big bench rest contingent where this cartridge case made sense. And this was also around the same time that the 338 Lapua kind of came into its own. So I started in 2004. And we had announced that cartridge as part of our lineup then. But the 338 Lapua then struggled with a lot of the chamber dimensions and which one you were using. Well, yeah, I mean, and we had to, and Joe dealt with this a lot. So, and Jayden, you probably did at some point too, but was trying to figure out where our ammo needed to be in this whole chamber conundrum, because which one are you going to match up to? So it was just fraught with peril, quite frankly, and it was very difficult. And then jump way ahead, and we could talk about this down the line here, but the 300 PRC, we controlled the chamber design, we controlled the cartridge case, everything was controlled. So now you have a hot rod, big 30 cal, extended long range cartridge with no questions about how you build it.
Right.
So
And
I mean, but that whole 338 Lapua thing was for 3 or 4 or 5 years. It was a big deal. And then Savage came out with the 338 Lapua rifle that every man could buy, which made a big difference. And then that chamber spec kind of normalized.
But it was, again, the 338 Lapua CIP chamber existed.
Yep.
So you were trying to retrofit. The 300 PRC was built from the ground up as, I need an accurate target rifle for testing bullets.
Yep.
Frankly. And we still use it. We used it in the lab at the time to test bullets. When we started building the heavier, longer, sleeker bullets, we still use it today down there. So, I mean, it was built with the sole purpose of accuracy, precision, consistency, all of those things you need to hit targets at long distances.
And when you went head-to-head, two of the same guns, one chambered in 338 Lapua with our bullet and one chambered in 300 PRC with our bullet, the 300 PRC, just by design and with those chamber dimensions, is just inherently more accurate.
Yep. So, not to take this tangential here, but what were you calling this cartridge back in the day? Was it? It had a funny name, at least that I know of.
Well, it had a couple names.
It had like 5 or 6 names.
Yeah.
And I truly,
so
because
the 3375 is the stretch and yawn, but
my original rifle has 2 markings on it now. Yeah.
No, it really was. It was.
Where did the 30 Boo Boo come in?
Oh,
That was the 8x68 version.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right before it. So that
right.
was, yeah, and who wants that? I mean, what do you want? I'm not going to call it that. So,
Yeah.
so
Fair
yeah,
enough. All
3375 Ruger, 300 Ruger, 300, I mean, you long. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
it had
300 AI.
300 AI. It had all sorts of nomenclatures.
300 Super Magnum, 300
HSM.
Hornady
Super
I still have
Magnum.
the dice set from the
So yeah, that
HSM.
was my push, was for it to be the HSM, the Hornady Super Magnum.
Okay.
So my rifle has 300 HSM marked on it, and then underneath of it is 300 PRC.
I should have
So,
brought in
I
some
don't know
of
how
that.
that works, but
I should have brought
I
in some
know.
of that
Old
original
stuff.
brass. In my hunting, for my hunting gun, I
Yeah.
still have that original brass with nothing on the head
Yeah.
stand.
You know, this is also tangential, but I think it would be worthwhile to get the 300 PRC because we're talking about it, but others as well. Get the 300 PRC and just go through all the employees that had a hand in it, go through the lab, and get the sticks of brass with no head stamp. Get the original size die that stamped 300 HSM and just make a shadow box, just a time capsule almost of, the stuff that went into developing that. That would be kind of a cool
well,
thing.
it's like they say, history's made every day. You just you don't realize that at the moment, Joe, when
Not
you
at all.
decided to neck this thing down, it was going to be what it became.
Yeah.
But this, what brought it into the light of day was necessity, and there was a lot of military things that were going on at the time, and that kind of helped push this thing into the forefront for us. There was a lot of testing going on with the military side, and a lot of times what they'll do, and Jayden, please jump in here because Jayden deals with this a lot. I did in my old life, but not so much now. But they're looking for a system, so they're looking for a gun, they're looking for a optic, they're looking for a suppressor, they're maybe looking for a cartridge, unless that has been defined, and then they build the rest of it around it. Well, when this started to come to be, they were going after a complete system.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this would have been 2011, 12 timeframe?
Yep.
So,
Yeah. In 2011 or 12, there was kind of some early forays into that, but when you get into like 15, 16 timeframe, that's when it really got defined. So
Okay.
I would say in 2011, 2012, they kind of wanted something, but they didn't know exactly what it needed to do, right? It was kind of like this fringe concept, like, we're going to need this at some point, but we don't have the data that we need to achieve to make that job complete. When you get to 2015, 16, they had the data. They said,
Okay.
Essentially stuff had happened, and they said, okay, we need this capability. Well, where in 11 or 12, those things hadn't really happened yet, so they didn't know that's what they needed, but they kind of had the idea.
okay.
I mean, remember what was going on then? We'd been at war since,
yeah.
a
decade
9/11,
plus of
right?
war,
And
yeah.
then there's been a lot of experience in Afghanistan, a lot of experience in Iraq, and there was urban missions, and then there was rural and stuff that was happening out in the mountainsides and things. So having something with a larger payload and larger max effective range was something that they were looking for.
And so they'd been traditionally shooting through 8 Winchester 300 Win Mag. I say they, as in the military sniper program.
And some Lapua.
And some Lapua.
Of course,
and-
a 50 cal as well for
Yeah.
stopping vehicles, things like that, too.
Right. So as we're starting, like you said, to get into the 2015, 2016 timeframe, and they've got some more parameters. The military sniping community has some parameters that they want to meet.
Mm-hmm.
How did the 300 PRC fit differently than their existing cartridges in what they were trying to do?
Well, in that time frame, so if we go back to the 11-12, that's when the Lapua was still kind of had some legs, right? Guys were still looking at the Lapua to fill that envelope
Because it was
performance
known.
they needed.
I mean, it was known.
Yeah, and some of the other countries' units were and still are employing the Lapua in that capacity. So the shoe fit there with the Lapua, but it didn't fit well.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you saw was a lot of guys were using the Win Mag, right? The 308. So what we're talking here is performance beyond 308 range, right?
Okay.
So 308,
800
call it
yards.
800 meters, right?
Yep.
You can cut it off there. So what was in the system within DoD to surpass the performance of the 308 was the 300 Win Mag, specifically the Mark 13. The problem with that is that the projectiles that were being used in the ammo for that system were not real efficient. They didn't perform real well, and they did better than the 308. Right, the Win Mag system would get you out to 1,200 meters, maybe a bit beyond that, but that was kind of it. Well, what you saw happen was the need for performance just kept extending. Right, it extended past 308, so you saw everybody start using the Win Mag because it was in the system and it was already there. Well, then they pushed the Win Mag as far as the Win Mag could take them performance-wise, and there was still a gap. There was still a void and a job that needed to be done beyond that. That's where the 300 PRC comes in.
Okay. And so to get that last little bit of range, let's say out to 2,000 yards, 2,000 meters, something like that, what separates the PRC from the Win Mag? The attributes, that the heavy bullets and stuff, but specifically what makes it better for being able to hit a target that far away? Because, 2,000 meters is a poke and a half.
Right.
That is a long shot, but the system needed to be capable of doing that.
Yep. Well, to answer that, you have to go back to what was the design intention of the system, right? So Joe just talked about what the design intention was of the 300 PRC, right? A no holds barred. I need accuracy and precision and consistency at distance at 1,000. That was the purpose of the 300 PRC in its inception. If you look at that from the Win Mag perspective, it was a hunting cartridge from the 1970s. It was meant to shoot 150 to 180 class spire point, lead-tipped traditional old hunting bullet designs. The chamber designs.
It's a 375 H&H, belted magnum case, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And if you look at, not just the Win Mag, but other cartridges designed in that era, they all have very similar attributes to them. And what we know about chamber design now and how it correlates to the end performance, those connected data points were not there back in the 60s and 70s. They simply didn't know that. They didn't know that if we did this to the chamber, it would do this to accuracy or consistency or whatever performance metric you're looking for. So that said, the Win Mag was a hunting cartridge from the 60s and 70s. Why did it then find its place as the go-to long-distance sniper cartridge of the 2010s? It's because there was nothing else there. There was no point design solution, and that's where the 300 PRC entered in with the Department of the Defense. Was they said, okay, we've taken this old 1960s, 70s era hunting cartridge as far as we can take it. We got to do something new.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, then the job was defined well enough that we could design something, or we already had essentially, that would fit that bill.
Awesome. So some of the big differences, just for our listeners to hit the wave tops, the standard twist rate is huge and kind of low-hanging fruit to talk about, in that if you're a custom rifle builder, if you're the military, you can get you can get barrels rifled with whatever twist rate you want. But the standard twist rate for a Win Mag is a 1 in 10 twist, and that limits you on some bullet length options, and bullet length is going to have a direct correlation to the efficiency of the bullet. If you want the most efficient bullet, you need a faster twist rate to get longer, better drag characteristics. So the standard twist rate in a 300 PRC, 8.5, 8. Joe, when you were doing stuff early on in your bench rest career, and Neil, when you started building hunting rifles early on, what twist rates were you guys running?
So in the target rifles, I have an 8.5 twist barrel. I think I still have that one. I had 10s, 11s, and 12s.
So you flushed this twist rate thing out.
Yeah,
mine's
11 a quarter.
Yep.
And it's I need a faster one
for the
sure,
heavy bullets now. But like my hunting rifle still has a 10 on it.
Yeah.
And I shoot, 2 12s is perfectly fine.
Sure. So from a military standpoint, though, we get that faster twist rate, and we've got bullets now that 10 years ago would have never been dreamed of. Our 250 grain ATIP, 225 ELD match, stuff like that. These really efficient long bullets, which is just huge. And then, like you talked about, the chamber design specifically lends itself to turnkey accuracy. Yep, and that's huge. And I say that again, they being the military sniper community that are fielding these things, they're seeing performance. 2,000 meters is a safe number.
Absolutely.
That's just remarkable.
And it exceeded, that when I said they had kind of defined, they had data and they said, okay, this is the job we needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that 2,000 meters well exceeds that job they had defined at the time.
Wow,
And we should touch on, it's not like we took the 375 Ruger, though, and simply just squeezed it down to 30 cal.
okay.
We moved the shoulder back. We, changed the dimension a little bit to make it hold the right amount of powder.
Right.
Because you don't need this colossal powder capacity. I mean,
Yeah.
you lose efficiency every time. So we designed that cartridge for specific propellants and charge weights and velocities in mind, again, to reach that optimum performance.
Turnkey performance. So let's talk about that on the efficiency side of things, because this is a big case. But there is a case that's too big. You can go too big. And let's talk about that, because I know there was some military application there where they were pursuing a cartridge that looked like it would be a good fit. But again, it's like, a flip-flop sandal fits a lot of feet, but it doesn't fit all of them very well. So from a consistency standpoint, I think, from hitting targets that are far away, the muzzle velocity consistency becomes hypercritical. Inside of 1,000, it's critical, but not as important. When you start pushing out, to 1,000 and beyond, you start looking at 2,000-yard targets. The consistency becomes more important than
any absolute number.
Yeah, than almost anything. So on the military side of things, they were looking at 300 Norma.
Mm-hmm. And some still are. So an important thing that I think might help the listeners understand is, where does a cartridge come from? So the 300 PRC came from an ammunition manufacturer, right? I mean, Joe was working in engineering and
he was
laid
the
all
ammo
that
guy,
groundwork, right?
Yeah.
What happens a lot of times is you see something that comes out of the Wildcat world, and I know we said the 300 PRC was a Wildcat in its initiation, but I wouldn't really define it as that, because a Wildcat is traditionally something that's just necked up or necked down from an existing parent case. And it's typically done by somebody that doesn't have access to pressure test equipment, all these advanced things that we have here as a manufacturer.
It doesn't have factory support. Well, it was developed at the factory, so by its nature, it's factory supported.
What I'm getting at, though, is most of the time when something comes out of the Wildcat world, say just some user that either necks a cartridge case up or necks it down to a different caliber, what they don't understand is when you do that, you're changing the volume in bore. So let's say necking down, right? Let's take the case of the Norma, perfect example. That was a 338 Norma first, so 338 caliber, and they necked it down to 30 caliber. Anytime you neck something down and you reduce that area left in the bore, by default, you're going to generate higher pressures if you put the same powder and grain weight.
So you need to go slower propellant,
or you have to drop your charge weight. Well, what happens in the case of the going, like Joe said, from the 375 Ruger down to the 300 PRC, you made a pretty big jump from 375 to 30 cal. And what the result of that was it allowed you to nail a burn rate speed of powder.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer using a Varget to 4350 speed powder. When you drop that down to 30 cal from 375, you have to slow the powder down. So that puts you in like Reliter 26 Rotumbo H1000 speeds.
Yeah, which have a huge track record of high performance.
Right, but you have propellants there that are in production and accessible at that speed that work there. The problem with the 300 Norma was that when they necked it down from 338 down to 300, you didn't have a powder that would still fill that case up that was commercially available. It's a betweener, right?
Yep.
If you go with the slowest possible powder to fill the case up, now you've lost some velocity performance because it's too slow for the application. If you go to the next faster speed, now when you hit peak pressure, your case isn't full. And so you have positional issues. Depending on which way the cartridge is oriented, the powder is gonna burn differently and produce different velocity. Back to the consistency thing you were talking about. So it's important for people to understand that you can't just neck something up and neck it down with no consequence. But those that don't have the ability to measure pressure, if they're just using, how the primer looks or the bolt lift is their method of measuring pressure, that's not accurate enough.
Sure.
So what you see is that 300 Norma is good as a hand loader's cartridge because you're not holding it to any pressure standard, right? So you can get away with running it at high pressure and fixing the case fill problem. But when you run factory ammo, you can't do that.
Right. So I guess a good summary to go back to the turnkey accuracy thing, was the factory dimensions, the factory twist rate, everything SAMI approved, so that everything started and finished on the exact same sheet of paper. Every rifle could be built with a standard SAMI chamber, which had match accurate dimensions. The case was purposefully designed to hold a very specific payload of powder that has a track record of temperature consistency, ignition performance, great velocity, extreme spreads being really, really good. And so that's why the inexpensive hunting rifle or the super expensive bench rest rifle all shoot really, really well and balanced and consistent, because it started that way. And I think, when we released the 300 PRC in 2019 as a new product, there was the usual host of folks that said that, well, my 300 Weatherby, or, oh, I have my 300 Win Mag, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's true, but what it doesn't solve is that you got the performance out of a 300 Win Mag, let's say, similar to a 300 PRC, by getting a non-standard SAMI twist rate, a non-standard SAMI chamber, seating it longer than SAMI approves, and running it at possibly a pressure that SAMI wouldn't have approved of either. So you end up with this totally custom platform, and the performance is great, but it's great for you, and it's, unless somebody else is going to go the complete custom route, you can't duplicate it. The 300 PRC really allowed anybody, any gun builder, any custom builder, anybody that wanted to chamber a rifle, just, again, a turnkey setup for consistency and extreme long-range performance.
Yep.
That really answers a lot of questions, because the 300 Norma is one that gets brought up quite often. And we were talking about this before the podcast, before we started recording. I was joking with Joe that the fastest trip down the drag strip is not always best, because more is not better. Better is better.
Sure.
And more speed is not always better. And the 300 Norma, that really, it's kind of the 300 Win Mag just scaled up. Long range trajectory through hot, nasty speed at the sacrifice of all else. Like in the 1960s, shooting a 165 grain bullet at the speed of light. You could hold hair out to 400 or whatever. That worked well, but technology has
we've moved
advanced.
beyond that now.
Yeah.
I think the best analogy that I can use that for our listeners and for people is, if you have a 300 Win Mag Weatherby, that's fine, but you're limited. You can shoot 180 grain bullets unless you go full on custom. 300 PRC, I can shoot any bullet I want. I want to shoot a 150 grain bullet, fine. Load it up, you can shoot it. 180 grain bullet, load it and shoot it. 230 grain bullet, load it and shoot it. I'm not limited by, I can take my cartridge and my platform, hunting, target, you name it, tactical, sniping, whatever, put my ammo in that platform of any flavor that I want for the job I need to do, and I can go do that. You can't go the other way.
Yep.
Can't go back in time and fix it.
Exactly.
No. That's just phenomenal. So that's, the big picture on why it was developed, obviously with the bench rest, and then really it came into its own in that military application. And there's, groups within the DoD fielding it as we speak, which is just phenomenal. But on the other side of the coin is hunting. I mean, this thing is just an absolute hammer, and you guys have all had the opportunity to take animals with this cartridge, and we're going to talk about some of that. But this cartridge really came into its own at the same time that you guys developed the Eldx hunting bullet. That was a huge passion project for a lot of people, and it ruffled some feathers, and there was a lot of new science going on with the Doppler radar. And that Eldx bullet, launched in 2015, we had some juggernaut bullets, the 212 Eldx. So I don't think I've asked this pointedly to any of you, but 2015-16 timeframe, 300, whatever you called it at the time, 212 Eldx. I know Neil had to go hunting with that as soon as we launched the 212.
Yeah, and I don't know who is.
You took the 200 grain to Africa,
yeah, I think,
and I remember watching our emails
but that
because
was
you were sending us
with
daily
the 300
updates.
Win Mag though. So that was in a Win Mag, but I took we had clear tips. So when we started doing the ELD products, we had clear tips. We didn't have color in them, and I took those in with my 300 PRC to Colorado and hunted with Fred Eichler, which was 2014, I would assume,
When you were
at
developing.
that point in time. So I don't know if I was the first one out of the gate that shot an animal with it or not. I have no idea, but certainly the first elk that got killed. Wow. So I was telling Fred, I was like, I got to test these bullets, man. So I need to shoot this thing at longer range. Well, this this elk came out across a field, and and I remember I wasn't necessarily disappointed, but ended up shooting it at like 400 yards, and I was trying to get it to stop at a little further away because we wanted to get some data on these bullets at extended range. So I shot him with would have been the 200 grain Eldx at the time, and you'd used my rifle maybe before that, something like that. Yeah,
I took yours to Wyoming.
Yeah,
I think that was in 14 or 15. It had
That
to
was
be right
14.
there. 14?
Yep.
So we got out and tested it out in the field, which was cool. And again, so I have a cartridge case with no head stamp, and I've got these bullets with these odd-looking kind of clear tips that nobody had ever seen before.
Yeah.
So I kind of kept them myself. We had an outdoor rider with us and things like that.
Yeah.
I was doing some field testing for the group. But yeah, I was building a custom rifle. I had a small piece of land that I was hunting in Nebraska, and I wanted to have a rifle and a cartridge that was capable of just positively anchoring a deer. And Dave Embry and I were talking, and that's where we ended up. And that was maybe a year beforehand. So started off on that path. Joe had been shooting it for a while at bench rest side. Like I said, I think maybe you'd taken it hunting for the first time, and then I went out hunting with it. And subsequently, that rifle's killed not just by me, but it's been a
Communal rifle.
rifle.
It really
for
was.
a group of people.
Yeah.
It's killed 5 or 6 elk at this point. I drew my once in a lifetime Nebraska rifle elk tag, so I killed a bull with it up in northwestern Nebraska. That was amazing. I remember we shot the bull and it ran off, and we started looking for it all over the place, but we'd gone down the hill thinking it had run down the hill. No, it had gone about 20 yards and died up the hill. So we wasted about half an hour, 45 minutes looking all over for this bull. Meanwhile, it had died right there. But the cartridge has been fantastic. I've had a lot of experience with the 375 Ruger too. So that cartridge case has been apparent for a bunch of things. The 375 Ruger is fits in a standard long action, whereas taking advantage of these long bullets now, the 300 PRC fits in a Magnum length action. But yeah, it's just been a phenomenal launch pad for so many things for us.
Yeah, and not to dive down a rabbit hole on Eldx bullets, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself, which we should probably do because that's a big story.
That's a fun
Yeah.
story.
But the 300 PRC from a hunting application, we're not gathered here today to talk about the ethics of shooting stuff far away, but there are instances where you're not getting any closer than where you're at right now. And when you have a cartridge and a rifle system and the practice and the training and a bullet to make that shot and to do it with incredible levels of confidence, that's really where the 300 PRC fits. And Joe, I know you've had the chance to take some animals at some extended range with this thing, and the balance is huge. So talk us through a shot with one of these things, because it's a big cartridge, but how you have your rifle set up, is it jumping like a mule and hard to see where your shots go and what the performance like?
So, it's a 30 cal Magnum. If you put it in a 10-pound hunting rifle without a brake on it, it kicks like a 10-pound rifle without a brake on it. Now, my gun is, my hunting gun's 11-something pounds, and then a scope, and it's got a Vias brake on it. Stuff. Your gun has a Vias too, right, Neil?
Same, yeah.
And I kid you not, Seth, that gun does not jump around. I can lay there and shoot it. Am I watching trace every time? No.
But you're seeing where the bullet goes.
You're seeing the bullet splash, absolutely. Especially at longer range where you get a little bit more time.
Sure.
So yeah, that gun is one of my favorite rifles to hunt with, especially like elk and big game and out where you could have a 300 or you might have a 500-yard shot. It's just perfect. It's so nice to have that level of performance in a hunting rifle with the confidence that you have in a target rifle.
That's a heck of a way to put it.
Yeah, my zero check on mine was I'd go to this range at this pasture, and I had a chunk of steel. It's a 14-inch chunk of steel. I'd get my data. I don't know if I'd even hold. I maybe favor a little left or right depending on the wind. That was about it. And I'd send it, and that cruise missile just would ting that thing. I'm good to go. 700 yards. We're ready to roll.
Mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, not everybody gets to call in an airstrike, but you could shoot a 300 PRC.
Yeah, and that's what it does. It's just so it's a.
Those bullets are so good.
And when we did was it the Eldx stuff? I don't remember. Maybe it was when we did the 300 PRC expose. But we had a variety of kind of popular Western extended range hunting cartridges. So we had like the Rum there, we had Win Mag, we had a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. And this cartridge just runs away from all those things. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have all that case intrusion that you do in some of the other ones.
The giant fireball coming out the barrel with this
Yeah.
obnoxious recoil blast
Yeah.
of, you're burning 100 and some grains of powder in some of those cartridges.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, this thing will run, 70, 75 grains of powder, and Hot Rod 300 Norma is like 105 grains of powder in some instances. And some of those big, the 3378 Weatherby, that's
Yeah,
90
precisely.
plus grains of powder.
Yep.
But that's where that's on the hunting side. That's where this cartridge really kind of lives. Now it's, I've shot deer with it. I'd shoot deer with it again tomorrow. It's great because you never know. You might have to take a 400 or 500 yard shot. I mean, how far across is your cornfield or your bean field or whatnot? So it's certainly applicable for that, and also at 100 yards, it's great. But I suppose its comfort zone is definitely in your western hunting, elk, mule deer, moose application, stuff like that. And a lot of folks who don't do much hunting out there, you can take closer range shots. That's definitely possible. I mean, and again, the whole long range shooting thing is a whole other subject that we don't want to get into. I mean, our kind of corporate policy, I guess, is look, if you get closer, you should.
Get
Yep.
closer.
However,
Absolutely.
there are times when it's across a canyon and whatnot, and a cartridge like this will do it for you. A big one is for those folks who are hunting late season cow elk. So you've got 100 eyes. They're all going to be together typically, and they're on the side of a hill. And boy, if one of them sees you, they're all out of there. A cartridge like this is just, I mean, that's what I'd say.
Yeah.
The 300 PRC is at home for that situation. So you're meat hunting elk, and a lot of those situations are going to be from hilltop to hilltop or from ridge to canyon and stuff like that. They're typically not 100 yards, but sometimes they are. But that's where this cartridge on the hunting application really excels. And then, of course, Africa,
Yeah.
places like that. Or if you're going to go do an international hunt, you need the absolute surety that this, you're gonna have great performance. Because again, those bullets just have high BCs and buck the wind like nobody's business.
Yeah, the wind thing is
That's what I love.
huge.
I love it.
Yeah, you can't get away from that. And I guess, the military application and the hunting application, I guess there's a third one, which I'm just going to blanket statement as fun. It's just fun. And I remember this is several years ago, probably 2016 or 17 time frame, and we were shooting, Jayden and I were out at Lexington a bunch, shooting stuff on the radar, and we had shot maybe some 338 Lapua and some other stuff. And it just feels like you get in a car wreck. Well, on one particular trip, it's like you
That's
shoot it
true.
all day and your teeth rattle.
Wincing every time you
Yeah.
pull the trigger.
So this one particular day, we were shooting stuff, and it might have been during the A-tip development. I can't remember exactly what we were doing. However, I do remember laying down on a 300 PRC target rifle to shoot groups at extended range, and we started at 1640 and we shot it all day, and I felt fine shooting it all day. It didn't feel like I got in a car wreck. And the first group that I shot at 1640, when I laid down, I wasn't wondering like, okay, I got to make sure I get a good wind call and hit that piece of steel. I laid down just nonchalant, wondering, I wonder how tight of a group I'm going to shoot at 1640 right now, because there was no question. And you lay down a 16 or 18 inch group at 1640, and that's where we started. It was just remarkable, and this is one of those moments where you're like smiling from ear to ear. One, this is a job, and somebody pays me to do this.
Yeah.
And two, like, this is just a rifle, and I say it was a target rifle. It was a factory built AI, so an expensive rifle, but nothing that we were turning barrels on a lathe for. With ammo that we just threw together in the lab the day before, ran it up to 62,000 pounds of pressure, and with a 225, and I just laid down and nonchalant, shot a minute and a half group at almost a mile. It's remarkably fun to do that, and you can bring that into 1,000. It makes 1,000-yard steel.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of production folks that have made 300 PRC rifles. You can buy them for not too much money, and then you're capable of taking those. The magical 1,000-yard shots is totally doable with this, and then you can push it to a mile, which is the other benchmark for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of folks that like, just for what you said, Seth. I mean, yeah, you can shoot these extended ranges and make it look pretty darn easy.
Yeah, I think that to me is just that was I don't know. I'll probably remember that day or that specific instance because I remember having that thought of like, wow, in my own head, your sides of your brain are battling like, well, you sound pretty arrogant, wondering how small of a group you're about to shoot, and then lay down and shoot 7 or 8 shots, or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, maybe maybe there's something to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, with a heavier gun, brake, suppressor, something like this, yeah, the recoil is not crazy. And with my rifle, probably the same. My hunting rifle, probably about the same as yours. I mean, there's certainly recoil. Let's not
Yeah,
fool anybody.
sure.
But with a good brake on it, I would tell you it comes down. Well, with that gun of mine, it's probably more like a 308 with that brake on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and
I have a 7 mag.
Yeah.
I hunted with a 7 mag in Wyoming growing up. I still own it. It's in my safe. I don't even shoot it anymore. That gun hurt. I mean, it rattles you when you shoot it. I'll go grab my 300 out any day of the week. So that, I mean.
And that's a lot of that is building a nice rifle.
Yeah,
So
modern
it
gun
handles it
building
well.
practices.
Absolutely.
Brakes.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, the guy that's got he's used to shooting his 300 Win Mag, whether it be 7 mag, whatever. You can go get one of these, and you're going to be like, this is fun. This is easy to shoot.
Yep.
Well, and comparatively to the Lapua, the 300 Norma, and 3378, there's just less. And I don't know if there's something you could calculate, but there's less just ejecta blasting out of the muzzle. When you're burning, in some instances, 30 grains less powder. There's just less
absolutely.
going on.
And it's
Absolutely.
more efficient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else you guys want to touch on the 300 PRC that our listeners might not know, just flipping through a magazine and see the 300 PRC? Any little nuggets from, since now we know this has really been in the works since 2007. It's well over a decade old, although it's only been SAMI approved since 2019. Anything notable before we roll on here?
It's really cool seeing how much more performance you can get out of a modern design. Kind of like when we were talking about that Win Mag being 50 years old, and how hamstrung you are by that 50-year-old design in what you can do with it. To your point, yeah, I can build a custom rig and make custom ammo and do all this custom stuff, but for the guy out there that wants to be able to go buy a rifle and buy a box of ammo off a shelf and shoot it a mile, you're not going to do that with a 300 Win Mag. You're not going to do that with all those old designs.
Yeah.
And the lessons we've learned over all these decades to culminate all those into a design, which is what the 300 PRC is, and then get that level of performance that's making you smile when you're shooting at a mile, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's rewarding to be a part of that. Yeah, that's Joe, the most humble man in the room, had the first hand in developing the cartridge.
He's done that on a couple of them.
I just needed a different tool for the job, though. I mean, let's just call it what it is.
Yep.
We've talked about this on this podcast forever. There's a pile of us at this company that are just, I would call us hardcore users.
Yeah.
In whatever vein that is. And I mean, I didn't come up with anything out of this world. It was just, hey, I needed a platform to test bullets at long range. We were starting to develop more longer range bullets, and we had to give them a
good platform.
A good platform. Yeah. Otherwise, what are you learning?
Yep, that's true.
And you can always tell if I don't know if you can tell yeah, that's probably a true statement. So when something gets developed here, you'll know it's going to be a winner when you kind of go around the hallway and stuff like this, and everybody has something chambered in it.
Yep.
Like when we have a new product and it gets that instant adoption from all the engineers, techs, marketing people, etc. So when those things start showing up pre-production, let's say, then okay, yeah, this is a good one.
This is about to be a home run.
Yeah.
Yep. It's very true.
That's awesome. Well, it has been a home run. I mean, it's certainly been adopted by obviously some of the military groups, plenty of law enforcement application. Just the average American hunter, we're seeing, there's factory rifles on the shelf available today. Just the average long range, steel banger. I mean, that is just fantastically accurate and easy to shoot. You can buy, something like a Ruger precision rifle chambered in 300 PRC, a box of factory match ammo, lay down
and send it.
Yeah, you're ready to compete, and that is pretty remarkable. And so, I guess in summary, 300 PRC, OG Skunkworks project, incredibly consistent design. Consistent muzzle velocity, uses propellants that we know are high performance, temperature stable, easy to ignite, incredibly accurate, and purpose built to hand the bullet off to the rifling inside the chamber straight with a twist straight that's proper to stabilize these super sexy bullet. For those out there listening, if you haven't had in your hand a 250 grain 30 cal A-tip, that thing is just it defies.
It's a cruise missile.
Yeah, it really is.
missile.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's a
calling
30
in
cal
the air.
missile.
It's calling in the airstrike. That thing is as long as a piece of spaghetti and 30 caliber in diameter. It defies what a 30 caliber bullet should be. So, well, I appreciate you guys sitting down, burning it up an hour here, talking about 300 PRC. I know it's a passion project for most of you guys, starting basically at 2007, which is pretty remarkable. So thanks for coming on with me, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everybody else out there in podcast land, thanks for joining us on this one, and we're going to get back to some Black Ops Skunkworks stuff, and we'll catch you on the next one.